The February cold in Calgary is the kind that gets into your bones before you even realize it. I'd been standing outside the restaurant for a full minute, trying to convince myself to go in, watching my breath cloud in front of me like small disappearing ghosts. It wasn't the cold keeping me there. It was the fact that my boots had a crack along the left sole that let in slush every time I stepped wrong, and I'd already stepped wrong 3 times walking from the bus stop. My feet were wet, and I was going to be serving a 4-top in 15 minutes, and I hadn't eaten since 7 that morning because I'd given the last of the peanut butter to my daughter before school. I pushed open the door. "You're late," said my coworker, already untying her apron. "By 4 minutes," I said. She gave me the look she always gave me. Half pity, half impatience, and disappeared into the back. I hung up my coat, tied my apron, and reminded myself that the tip-out on a Thursday dinner service could cover the gap in February's hydro bill if I worked it right. That was my life then. A series of gaps I was always trying to cover. My daughter's name was Phoebe. She was 6 years old, and she had her father's eyes. Dark green, almost gray in winter light. And my stubbornness, which everyone said was a curse, but I chose to see as a feature. She went to school 2 blocks from our apartment in Forest Lawn, and every morning I walked her there before catching the C train across the city for the opening shift. On the nights I worked dinner service, my neighbor Mrs. Kowalczyk watched her. I paid her in groceries and 1 homemade meal a week. It wasn't a formal arrangement. It was the kind of thing Calgarians did for each other, when the system wasn't quite catching you. The system wasn't quite catching me. I'd been a paralegal for 4 years before Phoebe was born, after her father left. And that's a sentence I'm still learning to say without the tightness in my chest. I tried to go back to the firm, but the hours didn't work with daycare costs, and the daycare costs didn't work with the salary, and eventually the math just collapsed. Waitressing paid cash. The schedule was flexible if you knew how to ask, and my manager, a blunt Scottish woman named Fran, who had seen everything, let me leave by 10 on school nights without making it a thing. I was grateful for small mercies. It was a Thursday when everything changed. Not a dramatic Thursday. Not a Thursday with any particular weather omen or strange coincidence beforehand. Just a normal February Thursday, the kind where the light is wrong all day, and you can't tell if it's 4 o'clock or 7. I was refilling the bread basket for table 7 when I heard the door. You know how sometimes a room changes before you understand why. The volume drops by half a degree. The air shifts. 3 people look up at once without knowing they're doing it. I turned around. There were 4 of them. Men in good coats, the kind of coats that meant something. The kind with real wool collars and no visible wear at the cuffs. 2 of them were clearly hired muscle, though they were trying not to look it. The 3rd was on his phone, and the 4th was... I set the bread basket down very carefully. The 4th was Jasper. Jasper Calloway, who I had loved when I was 22 years old with the specific, total, reckless abandon of someone who had not yet learned what loss felt like. Jasper, who used to meet me after my Tuesday evening class and walk me home along the river pathway even in January, because he said the city looked better in the dark. Jasper, who had held my face in his hands the night before he left and told me he'd figure it out. He'd come back. Just give him some time. 7 years of time. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe he just stood differently now. The boy I'd known had always been slightly hunched, like he was apologizing for his height. This man stood straight, and the room had rearranged itself around him in the way rooms do around people who have money. He hadn't seen me yet. He was looking toward the host stand, saying something to one of the men beside him. I had maybe 8 seconds to decide what to do. I went to the back. "Fran," I said. She looked up from the reservation sheet. "I need someone to take table 3 if it's those 4 by the door." She looked at me for a long moment. Fran had the particular talent of reading situations without being told anything. "Go splash some water on your face," she said. "I'll send Jamie over. I'm fine. You look like you've seen a ghost. Go." I went to the bathroom and stood over the sink and looked at myself in the mirror. I was wearing the standard black uniform. My hair was up. I had a small smear of something. Butter, probably, near my left wrist. I was 29 years old, and I had a daughter at home, and wet feet, and I had not prepared. at any point in the last 7 years. For this, I splashed water on my face. Then I went back out because I needed the money and because hiding in bathrooms was not a thing I was going to do. Not anymore. Not since I'd learned that no one was coming to rescue me. He saw me before I made it to table 7. I felt it. That specific prickling awareness of being watched. And looked over, and there he was, already turned in his chair, already looking at me with an expression I couldn't name. Not surprise, exactly. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like relief, which made absolutely no sense. I looked away first. I took the order at table 7. I went back to the service station. I reminded myself to breathe at a normal pace. Jamie, bless him, handled the 4-top without commentary, and for the first 40 minutes of their meal, I managed to stay on the far side of the restaurant. Then table 7 asked for the dessert menu, and I had to walk past his table to get it. Tess. His voice was the same. That was the unfair part. His voice was exactly the same. I stopped walking. I turned. I looked at him with what I hoped was the calm, neutral expression of a server who did not have a complicated history, with the man at table 3. "Mr. Calloway," I said, "is there something I can help you with?" Something shifted in his expression. "Mr. Calloway," he repeated, "is everything all right with your meal?" The man beside him on the phone had lowered the phone. The other two were studying the middle distance in the way people do when they've been trained to give someone privacy while remaining close. "Can we talk?" Jasper said. "I'm working." "I know, I can see that." He paused. "After then." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Tess, I'll let your server know if you need anything else." I turned and walked to the dessert display and picked up 2 menus and went back to table 7 and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, listing the options, asking about dietary restrictions, doing everything by the book, not looking over. My hands had stopped shaking by the time I got to the creme brulee. He left before the end of my shift. I noticed, even though I was trying not to notice. The 4 of them stood and put on their wool coats, and Jamie ran the card and they left, and I told myself it was over. That was that. Some things just needed to stay in the past where they belonged. Then Jamie came over with an envelope. "One of those guys left this for you." I looked at it. My name was written on the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. The specific cramped left-leaning script of someone who was technically right-handed, but had spent years trying to hide it. "Thanks," I said, and put it in my apron pocket, and did not open it until I was on the C train home at 11:15. Inside was a card from a hotel downtown. The Dorian, which was the kind of hotel that had a concierge who called you by name. And under the hotel name, in that same handwriting, "I know I don't deserve 5 minutes, I'm asking anyway. Room 814. Any time before noon tomorrow. If you don't come, I understand." And underneath that, a folded stack of bills that made my breath leave my body. $500. Cash. With a post-it note in a different pen, like he'd added it as an afterthought. For Phoebe. I sat with that for 3 stops. He knew about Phoebe. The question was how. And the larger question, the one I pressed against like a bruise on the rest of the ride home, was how long he'd known. Mrs. Kowalczyk was asleep in the armchair when I let myself in. Phoebe was in bed, the nightlight on, her stuffed penguin tucked under her arm the way she always had it. I stood in her doorway for a long moment, just looking at her. She had kicked off half the blanket, the way she always did. Her dark hair was spread across the pillow. She was, without any bias on my part, the most complete thing I had ever done. I pulled her blanket back up and went to the kitchen and made tea. The $500 sat on the table beside my mug. I thought about what it could cover. The hydro bill, obviously. New boots, the ones with the cracked sole. Maybe a proper winter coat for Phoebe, since she'd grown 2 inches since October. I thought about what it would feel like to not check the balance before I tapped my card at the grocery store. Just once, just to know it would go through. Then I thought about what it would mean to take it. I didn't sleep well. By 6 in the morning I had made my decision, which was that I hadn't made one yet, and I needed coffee, and Phoebe needed to be up in an hour. I walked her to school at 8:15. On the way back I stopped at the Tim Hortons on 17th, and sat with a medium double-double and looked at my phone, and looked at the hotel card, and looked at my phone again. I thought about what my mother would say. My mother was a practical woman, a nurse who'd worked in the ER in Edmonton for 20 years. And she would say something like, "Information is never your enemy, Tessa. It's what you do with it that matters." I thought about what my best friend Blythe would say, which would probably be unprintable in polite company. I thought about Phoebe's eyes. I was at the Dorian by 10. The lobby was the kind of lobby that made you feel slightly underdressed just by existing in it. Black marble floors. A fireplace you could stand up in. I went to the elevator before anyone at the front desk could make me feel worse about my coat, and I pressed 8, and I stood in the hallway outside 8 Finide in 14 for long enough that I was technically loitering. I knocked. He answered in about 4 seconds, which meant he'd been waiting. "You came," he said. "Don't read into it," I said. "I have questions." He stepped back to let me in. The room was enormous by any normal standard. A suite, actually, with a sitting area and a view of downtown and the mountains beyond, pale blue in the February distance. There was a tray of coffee on the table. 2 cups, he'd been that certain, or that hopeful. I sat on the chair farthest from the sofa. "How long have you known about Phoebe?" I said. He sat down. He had shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept either. "About 6 weeks." 6 weeks. "A contact of mine mentioned your name. It led to." He stopped. "I did some looking. I found her school picture on your sister's Instagram. My sister and her very public Instagram. I was going to have words. And before 6 weeks ago? I didn't know." He said it plainly, without defensiveness, which was somehow harder to deal with than if he'd gotten defensive. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't explain the rest of it, but I genuinely didn't know. I looked at him. I'd spent 7 years constructing a version of Jasper Calloway that I could be angry at. A clean story. He'd left, he hadn't come back, end of chapter. This was more complicated. I found I resented the complication. "Why did you leave?" I said. "The real reason, not what you told me." He was quiet for a moment. "My father's business was in serious trouble. Debt, the kind that doesn't stay polite. There were people he owed money to who were not the kind of people you owe money to. I went back to Vancouver to sort it out. I thought I could handle it in a few months." He paused. I couldn't. And then things got very complicated, and I convinced myself that getting in contact with you would put you in a bad position. So you made that decision for me. Yes. Without asking me. Yes, I sat with that. "What kind of business is your father's business?" A brief silence. "It was real estate development, but the people he owed money to were..." He chose his words carefully. "Connected to things that weren't real estate development." I understood what he wasn't saying. Calgary had been full of those stories in the years before the recession. Money moving through construction projects, through property flips, through the particular opacity of private development. I'd done enough paralegal work to know what the edges of that looked like. "And now?" I said. "I bought my father's company out of receivership 3 years ago, restructured it. Everything is clean now. I have a corporate lawyer, a compliance officer, and an auditor who enjoys his job perhaps too much." The corner of his mouth moved slightly. "We mostly do commercial development in BC and Alberta. Some infrastructure. Is that what the men downstairs are about?" "Security, yes. It's a habit I've kept. Some of the people from before are still." He didn't finish. "It's precautionary." I looked out the window. The mountains were very clear today, the way they get in February when the air is cold and clean and the city feels smaller than usual. "I sent the money back," I said. That wasn't true yet. It was still in my coat pocket, but I was going to. I'd decided on the elevator up. "I don't want your money, Jasper." "I know. I have managed without it for 6 years. Phoebe is healthy. She's happy. She has everything she needs." He nodded. His expression was careful in a way that felt earned, like he was choosing not to say something that would make it worse. "I just want to know her," he said finally. "That's all I'm asking for right now. I'm not going to disrupt her life. I just want to know who she is." Something in my chest did something complicated that I didn't have a name for. "She doesn't know about you," I said. "She's 6. She asks sometimes, and I tell her that her dad lives far away and that she'll understand better when she's older. I've never told her anything mean. I've never told her you left." My voice stayed even. I was proud of that. "She just knows there's a gap." "A gap," he repeated quietly. Yes. I'd like to help fill it, if you'll let me. I stood up. I needed to stand up, needed some physical action to counterbalance the feeling building behind my sternum. I went to the window and looked at the city. February downtown Calgary, the towers and the river valley, the gray-white sky. I need you to understand something, I said. She is not a negotiation. She's not something I'm going to arrange visiting rights to like a custody dispute. If you come into her life, you come in all the way, with patience and consistency, and the understanding that a 6-year-old doesn't care that you had complicated reasons for being absent. She cares whether you show up. I understand. I'm not sure you do. I turned around. Because the man I knew 7 years ago was someone who disappeared when things got hard and told himself it was for someone else's benefit. And that's not who I need anywhere near my daughter. He didn't flinch. He held my gaze and said, "You're right, and I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking for the chance to show you that I've changed." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about Phoebe's eyes. I thought about the shape of her jaw when she was concentrating on something. That stubborn set to it that everyone said was mine, but that I recognized, suddenly, and with a clarity that felt almost physical, as something else entirely. "I have to get back," I said. "I have a shift at 4. "Of course. Don't." I stopped. "Don't call me. Don't show up at the restaurant again. If I decide this is something I want to explore, I will contact you." I picked up my bag. "Is that number on the card still good?" "Yes." I walked to the door. I put my hand on the handle. I turned back because there was one more thing I needed to say. For what it's worth, I did wait. For about a year, I waited. And then I stopped, because I had to. Because I had a baby. And I was alone, and waiting was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I held his gaze. "So when you think about whether you deserved me to wait longer, the answer is no. You didn't. I stopped at exactly the right time." He said nothing. He just nodded, slowly, and there was something in his expression that looked like grief, genuine grief. The kind that understood it had no right to ask for sympathy. I left. On the elevator down, I pressed my back against the wall and breathed carefully. In the lobby, I walked past the fireplace and out the revolving door into the February cold, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my face turned up to the flat white sky. I didn't cry. I'd cried about Jasper Calloway, the way you cry when you're 22 and 23, and you don't understand yet that some losses are just losses, not signs, not lessons, just things that happen. I was done with that particular grief, but my hands were shaking. I put them in my pockets and walked to the bus stop and waited. That evening I made macaroni and cheese from scratch. The real kind, with the roux and the 3 cheeses. Not the box, because it was Phoebe's favorite, and because sometimes you just need to stand in your kitchen and do something that makes someone happy. She sat at the counter on her stool and told me about her day, about how her teacher had let the class watch a nature video about Arctic foxes and she'd decided she wanted to be a scientist who studied animals in cold places. "That's called a wildlife biologist," I told her. "A wildlife biologist," she repeated carefully. "Can girls be that?" "Girls are some of the best ones." She seemed satisfied with that. She ate her dinner with the focused efficiency of a child who had decided food was fuel, not experience, and then asked if she could watch one episode of her show before bath time. I watched her settled on the couch with her stuffed penguin, and I thought about what I'd said at the hotel. She cares whether you show up. I believed that. I'd built my whole approach to single parenthood on that belief. That presence, consistent and undramatic, was the currency that actually mattered. Jasper Calloway had a lot to prove. Whether he could prove it was not something I was ready to answer. Whether I was willing to give him the space to try. That was the question as I was still sitting, with 3 days later when I texted the number on the card. "Phoebe has a skating lesson Saturday at 10 a.m. at the Trico Center. She likes hot chocolate after. She doesn't know who you are yet. You would just be someone I know. If this is something you can do with no pressure and no agenda, you can come. If you can't do it that way, don't come." I sent it before I could talk myself out of it and put my phone face down on the counter and went to do the dishes. He replied, 4 minutes later, "I'll be there. Thank you." 2 words. No effusiveness, no promises, no elaborate statement of intent. Just 2 words. I stood at the sink for a moment with the water running, looking out the small window at the alley and the orange glow of the streetlight and the neighbor's cat sitting on a fence post like it owned the city. Saturday was 4 days away. I didn't know what it would bring, or what Phoebe would make of the quiet man standing near the boards watching her tentative crossovers, or what I would feel standing between the two of them, with 6 years of everything pressing against the present moment, like water against a door. But I had made the decision, and it was mine, and that steadiness. The knowledge that whatever happened next was something I had chosen with clear eyes and both hands felt like the only kind of solid ground I trusted anymore. I turned off the water and dried my hands and went to sit with my daughter.